You'll know if you should buy Marvel Cosmic Invasion in the next 62 seconds. Here's your TLDR. Cosmic Invasion is a gorgeous side-scrolling 90s Marvel comfort food with fantastic co-op and a stacked roster that's held back by some weird combat decisions and solo balance that keep it on the very good instead of genre royalty pedestal. This beat-em-up comes from the folks behind Shredder's Revenge, and it drops you and up to 3 friends into a Marvel vs. Capcom flavored arcade brawler with 15 distinct heroes, slick tag team combat, and absolutely pristine sprite work. The flip side is that enemy variety and sound design are on the competent end of middling. The campaign is short to medium depending on how you play, solo difficulty is tuned like it expects you to bring friends, and some foundational combat stuff, things like grabs, defensive rules, advanced tagging, all feel oddly half-baked for a studio that clearly knows better. If you have Game Pass or a regular co-op group, this is an easy download or a strong buy. If you're a hardcore arcade purist or mostly play solo, I'd lean wait for a discount and a few balance patches. Overall verdict for most is that it is very good and agonizingly close to great. All you wanted was that TLDR. Thanks for sticking around. Before you go though, do us a favor and hit the YouTube buttons so that the robots on the back end know this is a helpful video that doesn't make you wait until the last 30 seconds to get what you actually came here for. If you're new here, hi, I'm Squid. I cover action and shooter titles, and the name of the game here is Maximum Meaningful Info with minimum reaction faces. Today we're talking about Marvel Cosmic Invasion. Big swing at a modern arcade brawler. Let's start with the basics. The game launched December 1st, 2025 on PC, PlayStation, Xbox, and both flavors of Switch, with 4-player local and online co-op and cross-platform support in the mix. You can expect to pay around $30 US or your regional equivalent, and it's also day one on Xbox Game Pass, which matters a lot for how we'll talk about value later. It's developed by Tribute Games, yes, that Tribute Games, the same folks that brought you TMNT Shredder's Revenge back in 2022. So expectations for a punchy, polished throwback were already sky high. Critically, it's landed right around about an 80 average, with the vast majority of critics recommending it, squarely in that very good, almost great pocket, at least at the time of this recording. So we have a good pedigree, strong first impression, but what does it actually feel like to play? At its core, Cosmic Invasion is extremely simple in the best way. You walk mostly left to right, punch, kick, and super your way through waves of goons, tag in a second hero when things get hairy or to flex your combo meter, and cash in big, flashy supers when the screen looks like a Black Friday sale at an alien outlet mall. The twist here is the tag team system. You pick 2 heroes and can swap between them mid-combo, call in assist-style strikes, and juggle enemies in a way that feels much closer to Marvel vs. Capcom than, say, Final Fight. Or, for the Soul Calibur fans, get your Cervantes on. The good news here is that the combat is fast and flashy without being overwhelming. Button mashers will see cool stuff immediately. But there's enough depth in cancels, aerials, and tag-ins to reward people who actually lab their characters. In co-op, this goes from a fun beat-em-up to absolute chaos in a good way. 4 heroes, assist tags, supers, environmental destruction all happening at once gives it that Saturday morning cartoon in a blender energy that the genre lives on. The catch here is that a lot of the game has clearly been balanced around that co-op fantasy. And you do feel it if you try to brute force your way through on your own. We'll come back to that later in the friction section. Alright, so let's talk heroes, because this is where the game absolutely shows off. You get a 15-hero roster out of the box, and it isn't just the usual Cap, Wolverine, Spidey, you call it a day kind of way. You've got a mix of A-listers and some deep cuts. You know, characters like Cosmic Ghost Rider, Beta Ray Bill, and some other B-tier weirdos that Marvel nerds will absolutely lose their minds over. Note, I didn't say lose their minds in a positive or negative way, because it'll likely be both. Personally, I'm waiting for Jubilee to show up, or maybe Colossus, or Gambit. I think you can tell what franchise within the Marvel Universe I prefer. More importantly, they all play as different as they look. Your flyers and zoners, think Iron Man or Nova, they control the space and set up aerial juggles. Brawlers like She-Hulk or Wolverine excel at getting in faces, staying there, and hitting enemies with enemies. Tricksy characters set traps, manipulate positioning, or lean on mobility. And Tribute didn't just reskin the same moveset with different capes here. Even heroes that fill similar roles feel distinct in timing, reach, and risk-reward. Swapping between them actually changes how you approach encounters, instead of just swapping animations. And for Marvel fans, this is a big part of the appeal. It really does feel like a loving, playable toy box of the universe, not a mobile game roster accidentally stretched out to console size. Moving on to visuals, sound, and vibes. Artistically, Cosmic Invasion absolutely knocks it out of the park. The pixel art and sprite work are gorgeous. You've got clean silhouettes, expressive animations, and a ton of little Marvel nerd details tucked into the backgrounds. Effects work, like hit sparks, supers, environmental destruction, it just adds enough juice without becoming visual soup. It really does look like if someone took a 90s X-Men cartoon or arcade cabinet and quietly gave it a decade of therapy in modern resolution. The stages hit the classic Marvel spots, Wakanda, Savage Land, Asgard, New York, Negative Zone. If you've watched a Marvel movie in the last 15 years or picked up a comic book at any point in your life, you'll spot something familiar. The problem here is that functionally, a lot of these stages still wind up playing like the standard beat-em-up corridor, but now with themed props. They're solid, but rarely jaw-dropping from a gameplay perspective. Now, on the audio side of things, it's fine. The soundtrack is big, orchestral in a chiptune kind of way, and very modern superhero. It fits, but it doesn't quite have that weird, distinctive energy the art is channeling from the Marvel vs. Capcom era arcade machines. You'll get some catchy themes in the moment, but I kind of doubt many people are going to be humming Stage 3 background music next week. The voice work, on the other hand, is solid. Quips are Marvel standard, which means they're going to hit differently depending upon how allergic you are to banter and or how seriously you take yourself. Now let's talk about how the game actually keeps you playing once the novelty of punching bugs in Wakanda wears off. For the campaign, you're looking at roughly 3 to 6 hours for a first run, depending on difficulty, co-op, and how hard you push the optional side challenges. Structurally, it's a tour through Marvel hotspots with boss fights that are often very obviously future DLC or update candidates. Each hero here has a short level cap. Along the way, you'll unlock passive buffs and health upgrades to improve the behind-the-scenes feel of each character. And crucially, you'll keep your XP even when you fail a stage, which does take a lot of the sting out of banging your head against harder encounters if you're on the struggle bus. Now, that low XP cap does quietly push you to rotate through the full roster, instead of just maxing one comfort pick and ignoring everybody else. It works. Now, each stage typically has 3 challenges. These are often tied to specific characters or move types. Things like finish a boss with X character, land a certain combo, introduce enemies to gravity, that kind of thing. These then feed into a central unlock matrix that spits out arcade mode modifiers, character bios, lore bits, alternate costumes. All of these are like catnip to completionists or Marvel lore goblins. Now, outside of the campaign, there's a higher difficulty arcade gauntlet that leans into that old school, no continues, good luck vibes. Salt in some of those extra modifiers I just mentioned, and you've got some sizable replayability here. Really, it's where the combat systems shine the most if you actually care about routing and optimization instead of just seeing the story once. The bottom line here is that there's stuff to do beyond a single story clear, especially if you want to see every hero and every costume. Know that you're not getting some massive evolving live service grind. This is still, at its core, a shorter arcade-style brawler with a bit of extra scaffolding. And I, for one, can respect when a game knows what it wants to be and leans in. All right, moving on to performance and settings. Now, if you don't care about this, feel free to skip to the Friction Report chapter next. There's chapters down there. For everybody else, real quick rundown. On modern hardware, Cosmic Invasion is about as undemanding as you'd expect from a 2D beat-em-up with a few caveats. PC configs in the mid-range and up should have no trouble hitting and maintaining stable frame rates, minus a couple moments in later stages during multiplayer. The console version sits squarely at 60, with only occasional dips when the screen becomes everybody is flying and also somehow exploding at once. The Steam Deck has some conflicting reports about playability and appearance, at least at the time of this recording, but the majority of the chatter I saw while researching it leans positive. Now, there were some nasty issues around launch. Things like frequent multiplayer disconnects and some critical bugs. Bad enough that the team initially delayed release by several months and then rushed out a bug blasting patch right after launch. That first patch specifically called out fixes for host disconnects in multiplayer, a bug where heroes would respawn as a different character, general stability improvements for online sessions, and a couple odds and ends. Despite this patch, my multiplayer sessions after release did still see some disconnects. At often not great times, but the drop-in and drop-out nature of the game made rejoining comparatively simple and less painful than it otherwise could be. Now, on the settings side, you get what you'd expect. Basic resolution and display options, some visual toggles, including a CRT filter, either flat or curved, which I would strongly recommend turning on, since the nature of CRT screens, back when they were new, also served as a type of anti-aliasing for pixel art, to make it easier for your brain to fill in the gaps that improve the subjective quality of 12 pixels masquerading as a character. Outside of that, you have your standard audio mix and accessibility tweaks, and as a whole, there's nothing revolutionary here, but also nothing disastrous. As for parts where you might start to feel the rub, here's where we talk about why this sits just shy of the Streets of Rage 4 or Shredder's Revenge pantheon instead of in their company. There's a peculiar design choice. Outside of a couple characters, there's no grab mechanic at all. In a side-scrolling brawler, grabs are one of your main tools for crowd control, splitting packs, tossing high-priority targets, creating space. Cosmic Invasion just doesn't give you that option. Instead, you're leaning on specials, dodges, supers to buy breathing room, and that can work, but it means that when you're swarmed, you can feel a little bit more helpless than you otherwise should, especially for superheroes. And it tends to amplify every other defensive weakness in that character's kit. Now, given that Tribute absolutely knows the genre, this feels less like ignorance and more like a questionable design choice or overcorrection that didn't quite land. A second potential pain point comes about with how blocking, dodging, and parrying are distributed across the roster. I personally don't have a huge issue with this, but depending upon where you look online, this is like puppy-kickingly bad. Some heroes block, some dodge, some have timed parries, and there's no clear consistent rule for who gets what. No grounded characters dodge, flyers block, or vice versa style logic. Again, I'm fine with that because it leans into the unique shtick for each character, but that also means if you're swapping heroes a lot, you're also swapping fundamental defensive verbs constantly. In a game about quick reads and muscle memory, that's not ideal. Instead of internalizing one clean defensive system and focusing on spacing and timing, you're spending your time remembering which hero uses which button to not die, on top of learning their offense and how that interacts with every possible iteration and combination of enemy attack. Under pressure, that feels less deep and potentially more discombobulating at times. Now, the tagging in and out system has some quirks, let's say. Basic tagging is solid. The problem shows up when you try to use that directional assist tag. The stuff that's meant to let you do stylish extended combos and clever positional plays. At times, these can feel wildly inconsistent to trigger on purpose, which means that high-level play feels a little bit more random than it should, and the tag team concept never fully cashes out into a clean, expressive system. Now, it's not that the game's unplayable, far from it. It's that you can see the ceiling could hit it if the team tightens this up a little bit. Or potentially this is just a skill issue on my part and I need to get good. The game only has been out a couple days. I'm willing to own that. The enemy variety and stage differentiation can start to wear at times, because even with all the Marvel window dressing, you end up fighting the same core enemy types over and over. Bug goons, symbiote blobs, a handful of armored heavies, all recycled across multiple levels. Combine that with some fairly standard corridor layouts, that means a lot of the campaign tends to blur together once you're a few hours in. The bosses do help break that up, but the road between them isn't as memorable as the character roster deserves. And finally, let's talk about playing solo. The game clearly expects and is balanced around, at least mechanically speaking, high enemy counts, multiple heroes coordinating space, plenty of supers flying. You drop that down to one human and suddenly fun chaos becomes I'm either drowning in bugs again or man, there's nobody on the screen. Since the game scales enemy count with human players, but also seems to go weirdly between 0 and 11 when you're playing solo. And that tuning beyond the number of enemies can feel odd at times, and hits start to feel more cheap than challenging in a couple specific fights. Now, because you do keep your XP on failed runs, you can grind your way through if you're not having a great time of it, but it's not the clean solo experience that some of the genre's best entries have managed to deliver. All right, let's talk value. What are you actually getting for your money? And who is this the best for? At $30 US and a 3 to 6 hour campaign, plus challenges, arcade mode, and 15 heroes to mess with, you're looking at anywhere from one long evening to 15 to 20 hours if you're determined to clear everything with everyone. Now, on the Burrito Index, which measures the subjective enjoyment I get from the game versus having alternatively just spent that money on Al Pastor, full price here is basically 2 burritos and a drink for a very polished, nostalgia-heavy brawler. Now, if you're on Game Pass, it's the burrito your friend ordered and you stole bites from level of cost, i.e. effectively free, just your time. Well, that and the moral dilemma of supporting subscription models. Your mileage may vary with your tolerance of that practice. I think this might be one of those times where the smarter way to think about this could be by player profile and not hours per For the Marvel lore enthusiast who's primarily motivated by characters, costumes, references, and that, oh wow, they put that guy in experience. This is a strong buy, or instant download on Game Pass. I'd be surprised if you made it here and you haven't already started either of those processes, because the roster, the art, the unlocks are basically a Marvel theme park. The mechanical quirks are noticeable, but not deal-breaking if you're mostly here to cosplay and smash bugs with your favorites. Now, for the arcade purist or mechanics snob, their primary motivator is super tight expressions, high skill expression, clean defensive rules. This is a bit more of a wait for patches or discount, because the missing grab, inconsistent defensive assignments and interactions, and flaky advanced tagging are exactly the kind of inconsistencies that will drive you up the wall. After Butte patches these fundamentals, this could jump tiers for you. Until then, it's a fun, if flawed, labbing project. Now for the co-op group or party game crowd, who's primarily motivated by we have friends on the couch and are tired of Jackbox, and want something loud and fun. This is also a strong buy now, because this is where Cosmic Invasion absolutely sings. 4-player chaos, big supers, dropping in and out, rotating heroes. If you can squad up, the rough edges blur, and the whole thing just becomes a very good time. Now for the solo completionist, those of us who enjoy soloing all the things, clearing challenge modes and mastering single-player runs. Strong wait for discount. You can solo this, and the progression system helps that, but the difficulty tuning, inconsistencies, and lack of granular mechanical polish mean that you are signing up for frustration in spots. Now at half price, the pain-to-pleasure ratio makes a lot more sense there. So putting this all together in some semblance of a final verdict, as a Marvel fan service brawler, Cosmic Invasion is excellent. It's a great roster, gorgeous art, strong co-op. As a pure mechanic showpiece, it's 1 or 2 structural patches away from greatness. And as a solo experience, it's fun, but noticeably rough in some spots. So my verdict for most people here is that if you have Game Pass or regular co-op group, clear buy. Go out there, download it, buy it, get everybody to pitch in $5. You're gonna have a good time. Now, if you're a solo arcade purist, mark it as wait for discount. Keep an eye on patch notes and pounce if they clean up some of the rough edges here and there. And if you just bounce off 2D brawlers in general, this probably isn't the one that's going to convert you. Wishlist it for a deep sale if you're Marvel curious, and I think you'd be better served by either Streets of Rage 4 or Shredder's Revenge if you were looking for a stronger entry point into the genre. Now, if you want more reviews like this, clean, honest, zero fluff, hit the buttons. It helps more people dodge the rage bait garbage and find stuff that's actually useful. I've been Bald Squid. I'll see you next time.